Plus, Ultra presents The Grey Lodge, part 3 of our Sinister, Sorcerous and Sinister Traditions of Southeast Asia series, what we are calling Speculative Anthropologies of Magic. This is part 3, Dukun, which is the Indonesian word, Bahasa word for shaman, psychic, spiritual practitioner, sorcerer, various things, which we will, of course, get into on this episode. This is a continuation of the first two parts, of which was Lursi, which dealt with primarily Northern Thai, Lana, magic, tattoos, yantras, Buddhist esoteric Theravada, which is we'll say the thread or the current that ties all of these things together. Yes, even the Indonesian and Malaysian magic is in fact, indeed, tied with the thread of esoteric Buddhism. So we'll get into that as well. Of course, I am today, I'm solo, but that is okay because it is summer and we are just rocking and rolling. And this is kind of, I started doing the speculative anthropology series um, primarily because of we'll say, mysterious. Uh, well, I'll just say his screen name, Don Lander. I started doing it because I mistakenly thought that he was a Burmese, like a diasporoid, like me, like a Burmese accountant, and he would DM me with questions on pizza and like observations on my own work, like podcasting work. Oh, I'm Jim the Ninja. I host a show called Threshold Saints. This is the Grey Lodge. This is our roundtable of Metamagicians. Of course, my co-host Solar Exile, who's also an often co-host on Threshold Saints. He has his own Substack. You can check him out. He also has a viral tweet today, so uh, good job, Solar. Gold star for you. He's away doing spooky things in the woods. Joshua, the branch, who was supposed to come, he may still. We'll see. Um, he has his own he has all his own podcasting work, but he's also been a co-host on Threshold Saints many times. Of course, Eros to Ethos. She has her own YouTube channel, her own content, and she's a frequent contributor to Occult Rejects, of which is where I met her. And of course, we're all in the Grey Lodge, which is a kind of circle of consent, a meta magicians group chat and book club. Primarily, we started as a book club and we've expanded into speculative series, speculative science fiction, speculative futurism, and speculative magic, but particularly speculative Kabbalah, speculative Kalachakra, Tantra, and speculative Gnosticism with a small g. So I think that this doing this series on speculative anthropologies of Southeast Asia is something that anyone who knows me knows I'm extremely fascinated with, knows I'm extremely taken with the mythology. Is deep, it's rich, it's Buddhist, it's Dharmic, it is the sorceress. So I think all in all, the series has been sort of revived my interest in doing these kind of more long form series. Instead of just book club, of course, we are doing book club. We do owe, as I mentioned, our mysterious friend Don Lander. He wants to jump on for our Apophenion part 3, so I'll make sure that that happens. Um, we do have a very, 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 very special series upcoming, which will run concurrently with the speculative anthropology series on Battlestar motherfucking Galactica Reimagined. So this will be a 3-part, and yes, I will try and keep it to 3 parts. Maybe we won't even get there, but let's try. So 3 parts on speculative Gnosticism and the meta magic of Ron Moore's Battlestar Galactica Reimagined. Yes, Cylons, Hellenic gods, Vedic gods, reincarnation, humans, the perennial system, cycles, texts, priests, shamanic visions. It has it all. And it's set in space. So we will be starting that. So I'm very proud and happy to announce that. It seemed like everyone was very into it. And yeah, we're definitely going to do that starting next week. And then the week after will be another speculative anthropology series. We also we need to do a Lurcy part 2. like a part two to the Thai series, so I can get more into Bangkok and central Thailand, that kind of magic, and also that kind of how it differs from the northern Thai Lana style, and also how it differs from Khmer, like Cambodian, and Lao magic. So there are differences, and I think that we've attempted to sort of divide them into neat little epistems, which, if you listen to the show, is genuinely impossible, but it's a worthy effort. So we'll continuing in that spirit. We're gonna do Dukun tonight. So this is, as all of our um, speculative anthropology series, it is based on two different books, but there's been like I don't know, about 10 different books that I don't know how many people have read them outside of me, but I have tried to share them with everyone who has wanted them. So we are doing that. And okay, so it's based on the K.M. Endicott's, Kirk Michael Endicott's analysis of Malay magic, as well as The Malay Magician by Richard Winstead. So those are both published by Oxford University. Can easily find them, either the PDF if you're a pirate on the internet, or a ninja on the internet, or a surfer on the Aether Wave. You can find both of those books. And of course, what else? Sorry, I'm a little nervous. By myself, solo dolo. It happens. Okay, so yeah, both of those books are sort of the premise through which this series is founded. Of course, we talked about the Peter Jenks book, Esoteric Buddhism, Esoteric Theravada. So that's part of the sort of underlying premise of the series, is that Tantra is real, magic is real, and scholarship sort of foundationally asserts that point, I think. And I think we can also make that case. So let me give you a little background on why I chose Dukun. So if you don't follow the show or follow me, you may not know this, but I have a diaspora background, and it is Chinese Indonesian. So the Dukun is a very important word for me in particular because of it has a multifaceted meanings. It can mean various things, like a shaman, like a psychic, like a sorcerer, as I mentioned at the very beginning. Like there are different kinds of Dukun too. There are ones that are more flavored by Islam. There are ones that are more flavored by Daoism. There are ones that are very syncretic, that come out of a tradition called Kebatinan, which most people don't know about. But people will actually know of the contours, because if you've read any Mantak Chia book under the sort of broad Taoist or tantric subheading, he's actually not really talking about either Taoism or Tantra per se. He's really talking about this syncretic Javanese magical system. It's really a kind of Sufi, tantric, Taoist, with a little other things, but that's primarily what it is. And so he's talking about that. So um, that's basically is the genesis, because it's in the popular culture, popular imaginary of everyone pretty much in the archipelago. And so it is difficult in some ways to link Malaysia with Indonesia, which might be a surprise to people, simply because they seem very ethnically close, which they are for the most part, and linguistically. But also linguistically, they are different and distinct. So, but I'm going to use the Bahasa Indonesia words, the Dukun primarily, but I will have to use some more traditional classical Malay words as they arise. So, yeah, that's basically it. And so I like Dukun because it can also mean a scion, which, if you go to my Twitter bio, you will see that I sometimes speculatively call myself, well, not sometimes, often, but speculatively call myself a scion. So that's basically it. And I like that he's a shaman. I like that he's a sorcerer. I like that there's no clear division between white and black magic necessarily, and we're going to get into that as well. Um, and I do highly suggest that you go listen to our other series, Witsa and Lursi, simply because those will also provide a foundation for what I'm going to talk about tonight. So let's begin, I guess. So I'm gonna So, okay, so let's start with a little history. I think that's the right flavor, right way to go. Um, so basically, Malaysia in the third to fourth century was Mahayana Buddhist primarily, but it was also largely populated by different people than live there now. So, yes, there were Malays, obviously, ethnic Malays, but ethnic Malays actually come from Sumatra, Java, and Bali. And so those were the primary sort of places of, we'll call it civilizational influence in Malaysia, both continental and in the Malaysian island chains. So a lot of the people that lived there were orang, which it means like original people, which can mean various things. It can mean what is now the sort of it's not, people don't say this word anymore, but negrito, which are kind of a smaller in stature, and forest people. That's what orang means. It can mean original people, forest people. So the negritos are the sort of, that's the one of the theories anyway, is they're the kind of the original population of the Malay Peninsula, as well as parts of the Indonesian archipelago. But this is when the sort of Malays, the ethnic Malays, who are speculatively said to, not from me, Jin, but from scholarship, speculatively said to come from Taiwan and Yunnan. So, basically, yeah, so they, I guess, speculatively came south and sort of populated the peninsula as they will, and also, and then there was civilizational influence from Bali, from Sumatra, and from Java. So there were two primary civilizational dynasties, we'll say. They are Indonesian, which is, of course, part of what this space is. But since we're talking about the Malaysian Peninsula, let me just explain them quickly. So there is the Srivijaya and the Mahapahit Empire. So Srivijaya and Mahapahit. So basically, these were syncretic, tantric, Hindu Buddhist empires that come from the islands of both Java and also Sumatra. So, and then Bali has its own sort of history and influences, but this does play a part. So, early scholarship, which is primarily what we've been talking about throughout the series in terms of looking at sort of like pre 1930s or pre 1970s, even, to update a little bit, scholarship, because it's really important that we understand like what the ideas of where they came from, and then sort of where they are right now in 2026. Obviously, which is partly what we do through the space, is like distill and distillate and alchemize the ideas. So, okay, so these are two different dynasties, but they are deeply interrelated, intermarried, and the early scholarship calls it a Brahmin tantric complex, meaning Buddhist tantra, but also including what they call Brahmanism. This is found in both books, both texts that I mentioned at the very beginning. So, Brahmanism is not really appropriate term in the sense that it's kind of like a Vedic, it's kind of a nod to the Vedas and also a kind of classical Hinduism, whatever that is, probably post Adi Shankara. But this is not really what they were practicing. And so I understand why they have an inclination to call it Brahmanism, because it's more related to the Upanishads and the earlier kind of Hinduism, in a way where the Trimurti is Shiva, Vishnu, nominally Brahma, but it really functionally was Shakti. So you have Shiva, Vishnu, who are also the Puranic triad. I just want to point that out. They form pretty much the basis of most ideas in contemporary and also historical Hinduism. So when we're talking about Brahmanism and like an academic conceptualization pre 1970, we are really not discussing Brahmanism as it is understood on Twitter or as it is understood in the popular consciousness. We're really talking about Quranic or Upanishadic, at both, really both, formation of religion. So That is a big part of the both of those dynasties and empires, but it also is a big part of Malaysia. But the oldest archaeology, as I mentioned, from the third and fourth century, really is Mahayana Buddhist. So you'll be thinking, like, how can this be? How can this be? Well, Mahayana Buddhism, as we discussed extensively in the Wita episode, really is an extension of this strain of esoteric Buddhism, both Mahayanist and Tantric, that came from West Bengal, Nepal, and Central Asia, primarily, but not exclusively, and filtered through a kind of maritime a trade route, a maritime Silk Road. So bringing all of these kinds of influences to the archipelago and to the peninsula. So it primarily first it was Mahayana Buddhist, which is a even though people think of Mahayana Buddhism in contemporary terms as being just like about beautiful temples that are like very loud and Chinese in style, gold and bodhisattvas and all of that, really, Mahayana Buddhism is an esoteric Buddhism, but it's an esoteric Buddhism for the normgroids because it places high emphasis on the idea of exoteric cultivation methods. That's really the primary difference, I would say, between what is standard Mahayana and then when you're getting into tantric ideas, you're actually going into esoteric cultivation methods, right? But your view is said to be the same. So we'll just go with that. It's a little more fluid and flexible than that a lot necessarily allows for, that framing allows for, but I think it's a fair assessment. So that Hinduism, as it sort of became, as it took shape, as it unfolded, was, as I said, part of this complex. But it was sort of subordinated or even just co co-creative with the Mahayana Buddhism of the area. But then in the about 10th century, you have Tamil traders and also just North Indian traders who were largely, yes, Mughalized or Muslim, especially the North Indian ones. The Tamil guys were Shaivites. So they were, even though Shaivism isn't necessarily tantric, and certainly for the most part it is not tantric, like 99%, they're closer to Tantra than Vaishnava, like by a lot. And so they're because Shiva worship is primarily Puranic and Tantric. So they introduced Shaivite texts, Shaivite ideas, sort of like this non-dualism, Shaivite non-dualism, qualified non-dualism, into the sort of which already existed, of course, because Tantra, especially Buddhist Tantra, primarily is largely non-dual. I mean, it's sort of part and parcel of what Buddhist Tantra is, even if you're not interested in Naropa or Nagarjuna. Primarily, it is non-dual. That is the correct view. So, um, but I would say it already existed, but they're introducing it in perhaps a different sort of ontological framing or cosmological framing, both. And so that also plays a role. It's also the introduction of the Bhairava Tantras. Yes, yield famous, most famous Tantras on Twitter anyway, because they're readily available in English and everybody seems to say that they've read them. So I'm not convinced myself that anyone other than myself and maybe a handful of other people have actually read them, but I digress. There's a lot of YouTube content on the Bhairava Tantra, so if you're interested in that, this will not be the channel for you, but perhaps you can go find someone who has explicated on it. As I said, there are many, different people discussing these tantric ideas now. Very different landscape, esoteric cartography than it was 3 years ago when we started doing Grey Lodge and Threshold Saints. So. But one channel I do highly recommend is Rajarshi Nandi. I think it's called Adult Mika. Anyways, you can go check him out. He's very prolific on YouTube. He talks a lot about goddess tantras, Bhairava, all the different Bhairava cults. That was the primary basis. This is, and you're going to ask, why am I plugging another person's YouTube? I'm not plugging another person's YouTube. I'm plugging a very important tantrika for like we're doing calling this speculative internet scholarship or deep web gray librarianship, he's part of the canon or the corpus that we have to draw from, because he is a high level tantric. And he also practices a Sri Vidya. Well, it's a Kali Kola Shastra, meaning their practice texts are Kali. Like they're not Kali, as in that's not the primary goddess. That's not who Kamakya is. Kamakya is the Yakshini queen, who is a manifestation of Lalita Tripura Sundari. Now, why is this even important? Because in the later introduction through the Shavite or through the Tamil, yes, the Tamil Shavite traders, they did introduce these more, I would say, ferocious forms of what is called Dara Devi or Dara Devi Kali or Dara Devi Durga. Excuse me, I couldn't think of it. So if you go back and listen to the Weeks episode, we talked about not goddess who is named Chandika. Well, if you go read the Devi Mahatmya Purana, the Chandika is actually the higher octave name for the goddess Durga. Chandika means the shining one, she who is resplendent, and also victorious over herself. That's a big part. That's not necessarily the meaning of the name, but it is also. It's a tantric Sambodhya Gaya meaning. So this is a very important part of who she is. Um, so Anyways, this is the older name, and this is the more important name. So this actually is higher than Kali and higher than Durga. Durga is a composite name and a composite being. Now you'll ask, no, I've heard that she's the mother. All these Indians on Twitter always post about how she is the mother. Yeah, sure, she's the mother. She's the queen of the immanent world, but she is composite and made of all the gods, all the stars, all the dakinis, and she takes a material manifestation. And so she doesn't really have her own will or her own name. You could say Chandika is really her name because it's referring to the higher concept outside of both space and time. Although you could say that at the highest, one of the higher ideas of Tantra is that the Shakti or the feminine divine principle at the highest point of where she can arise, if you want to compare it to the tree of life, but or to just like the three world cosmological division that they usually that I would usually explain in any discussion of Tantra, she would be space. But she's actually able to liberate in space, especially in Buddhism. Well, maybe only in Buddhism, but particularly in Buddhism, she is able to be liberated from space, quote unquote. Because I know this is a often frequent discussion when my other co-hosts are here is like, how do we get outside of cause, outside of time and space? Do we want to get outside of time and space? Is it what is the Bina Hokmah relationship? Is that the primary gravity and destruction? Is that like the gravitational and corrosive force that takes us outside of form, that takes us into zimsum of the three or four worlds, depending on your system? So yeah, it's a perennial discussion. Anyways, Chandika, she's a higher force than both time and space. Although she could be said to be space, depends on your framing. A more outer tantric layer, she is space. So we'll just go with that. But I might nod to the idea that she's more liberatory than that. But okay, so time and space, Chandika, Kali. Kali is actually a very recent name, and so you're going to wonder. I'm going to put up. You're going to wonder why I'm talking about Kali. Well, as I mentioned, in the Weetza series, we talked about a not goddess named Chandika, who I say is, well, it's not that I say, it's that she is the Upanishadic goddess Chandi, or Chandika from the Puranas. The Devi Mahatmya Purana is the most famous of the Devi and most important, and probably the oldest Purana that is still utilized, practiced, and read. So basically, this is the highest octave. She is the queen of the Dakinis. That's a very common understanding. Uh, so she takes this appearance in Indonesia and the Malay archipelago as a much more ferocious goddess. Now she is called more associated with Durga, but she actually takes a form that is more akin to Kali. So you have to wonder if this was like a kind of earlier stage Hinduism, we'll call it, or maybe an intermediate stage form, because in Tibetan Tantra, we have various forms that are called Arda Ugra, or half ferocious, half terrifying. So it can be, there's a mixture of iconographical forms, but it is interesting that Durga, who is much more associated with the mother, maternal figure, with Netzach, with sort of the liberation from various, disasters, diseases, and all sorts of afflictions of humanity. Durga, Kali, what does stuff to do with Indonesia, Dukuns, and Malaysia? Okay, well, it's very important in sort of the formation of these early dynasties, the Srivijaya and the other one I mentioned, to have this very ferocious feminine divine figure, especially after the introduction of the Bhairava Tantras and probably various, maybe some of the Kali texts as well, introduced into archipelago. And certainly one of the most interesting things about Indonesia and Malaysia is that, my apologies, Grey Lodgers. This is Jin the Ninja from obviously the Plus Ultra series. Dukun part two. This is part two, but the live stream from previous went down. But we are back, and sorry about that. I do have some tech and perhaps even some skill issues at times using these complicated Rahuvian dragon technologies, such as the internet and streaming services. So thank you to my laptop for screwing up the browser as well as my mouse. But anyways, okay, so we move forward. So I don't even remember where I was at because I kind of rage quit as I saw the browser crashing before me. Hey, Cassandra, of course, our Chibiusa, our daughter from Yesod, from the moon, our Lady Babylon. Thank you so much for coming and always supporting me and always supporting the show. Cassandra is a great addition to our lodge. I'm so glad that we became friends, and I'm so glad that she is part of our, network of Nexion of magicians, sorcerers on the carnal ground. Please check Cassandra out. She has a 15% sale right now on her Etsy. I believe it's on her Etsy and tarot services, as well as she's also a content creator with her own channel and her own stuff. And she also has an upcoming episode on Threshold Saints, which is going to be really cool. I just have to the reason I've been a little slow in editing is simply because the same technical issue has been plaguing me for a couple weeks. But again, I will get it out, I promise. And everybody can look forward to that. So I thought we just start fresh, kind of like shake it off, as they say. And we will, this is, so I put an image up on screen. So I think we were talking about soul complexes now that I recall. So this is as I said, the soul complex is more complicated, no pun, than is initially understood by a lot of scholars. So this is probably the best distilled. You are most welcome. This is probably best, and shout out to our mysterious Japanese dwelling Nihongo enjoyer bro, Don Lander. I was going to call him his name, but I won't. But anyways, yes, shout out to him. Okay, for the inspiration for this series. Okay, so on screen, I put an image of Datuk Gong. Datuk Gong, well, this is actually Tuti Gong. So let me back up. So Tuti Gong is the Chinese deity of the earth. Now, what kind of earth? So we're talking about animism and relational ontologies. And we are talking about a grandfather who lives under the roads or the hill. This is often like if you go to Singapore, there's a lot of places called Bukit. That means hill. It's the Bahasa word for hill. So they're kind of genus loci. That's what he is. He's appointed by greater heaven, appointed by the Jade Emperor or God sometimes, and he is. There are multiple grandfathers under the earth, multiple genus loci, multiple Datuk Gongs or Tuti Gongs, and you'll see this is a syncretic image that I put up. that I posted, he's accompanied with these sort of sub saints, and I am calling them saints because a Datuk, one way to understand Datuk, is a saint. But it can also be a holy man. It can also be a title like a baron. That's very similar to what it is, a baron or a knighthood. Um, you have to think like Malaysia is largely made up of kingdoms and principalities, and Indonesia still has multiple royal families. Each, being the governor, usually the governor of their own region. Hey, Vanessa, Truth and Dies. Everybody, check out Vanessa's Etsy store and her IG, Truth and Dies. She always has cool stuff going. And I think she has like sundresses right now and tie dye shorts for men. Obviously, I think I'm getting a pair myself. So, yeah, everybody check her out. Thank you so much for coming and being a part of our meta magic circle. So, 2D Gong is the Chinese version, but Datuk Gong is a little different. It's a syncretic Malaysian version. Now, this is contentious because there is a lot of like ethno narcissism plus different ideas of the origin of things, as there always is, and but I would say it's highly syncretic in nature. So the sub saints, the datuks, they are people who actually were alive, or they can also be pre-Islamic ish sort of spirits or saints, ancestors, royal ancestors, very similar to the Huitza cult from Burma. So if you're interested in like the discussion of like who is a Huitza, who is a not, a spirit worshipped in the kind of esoteric Burmese tradition, Burmese Buddhist tradition. It is very similar in a way, but these are these are living people. These mostly were living people, except for the 2D Gong, the earth god. These are appointed by heaven. Now, sometimes they are real people. Sometimes in China, in particular, like there's the Shanghai Earth God Temple. It's actually the name of the god there is a bureaucrat from the sixth, or yeah, I believe the seventh century, Song Dynasty. So but he's the city god, so he's the ruling deity of the earth, of the city itself. These like a 2D gong like this, it might be on an anthill. That's a very common place to place a shrine, under a tree, a banyan tree or a neem tree sometimes. But if you're talking Southeast Asia, if you're in Singapore or Malaysia or Indonesia, you will see these underneath banyan trees, which are related to figs. So it's a magical tree. It's also very deeply associated with Shiva. And if you are familiar with malas or Buddhist or Indian rosaries, yeah, Bodhi seeds as well as Rudraksha seeds, Rudraksha, the sort of rough version, Bodhi and Rudraksha are very similar, closely related trees. But yeah, both of those come from fig family trees. So that's why banyan trees have all the magic. So it's where the spirit, excuse me, it's where the spirits dwell, because of the wide canopy, large canopy. So anyway, this is Datuk Gong, but it's also a 2D Gong. So he's also the earth god, but he's accompanied by these local saints. So obviously, my show is called Threshold Saints. This is a common discussion we've had. It was a very common discussion, a very important discussion we had during the Huitza episode. What is a saint in this context? What is like who can be one, obviously. And so these are people who demonstrated spiritual power in life. Now, in terms of religion, they usually are Sufi or Dukuns. They are usually kinds of syncretic shamans, or just magical people, or just very holy people, just very religious, people in the community, maybe like some kind of religious teacher who had like more esoteric things to say. And but they can also, as I said, they can also be Dukuns, and sometimes they can also be Chinese, but usually they're Malay. So these are kind of a subset of the Data Gong sort of complex, or the 2D Gong complex. Primarily, I know about 2D Gong simply because of course, I'm a diasporoid. And so he's a very important god because he is the ruling god of the road. And so you traditionally would pray to him as a traveler, or as a rickshaw driver, as a trishaw driver, or whatever it is, tuk tuk if you're in Thailand. And he would protect you on your journey, make the roads clear for you, very much like a Ganapati in a way, or like a saint that will be upcoming on the the Grey Lodge Speculative Anthropologies, San Simon or San Mashimon. So we're going to do a whole episode on that kind of Guatemalan syncretic Catholic complex, as well as we'll do other countries in Central and South America. Sorry, I couldn't think of it. But okay, back to the peninsula of Malaysia and the archipelago of Indonesia. Okay, so these are very common, but they obviously, as I said, they're very syncretic. So you have a large diversity in people who will participate in the cult. Now, these are primarily Malaysian in terms of like the Datuk cult, like where you see the guys wearing the little Sufi hats or the master. What's what Datuk means? It's like a Datuk has all the ilmu. Sort of a knight or a sir. That's kind of a way to understand it. Baron. Has all the knowledge. So that's what Ilmu means. Remember, we were talking about Ilmu Santet and Ilmu Hitam. Those are both ways to translate black magic. So interesting. Okay, so where are we going with this? Well, okay. So like Chudi Gong, really important, but you'll see it in Indonesia, but primarily as a more Chinese style deity. So that's also interesting of itself. The Data cult didn't really take hold in Indonesia to a large degree, but that's also not true because you do have. I'm going to post an image. Let's see if my. No, of course not. Of course not. Right when I was about to post something interesting. Oh, there we go. Okay. Got it. Data Gong, bless the space, right? Here we go. So this is a more Indonesian character. I'm actually forgetting his name, but he is based on a actual royal family ancestor from one, I think from Java. He's associated with obviously tigers. You'll know that I am very fond of the tiger face Lurcy or the tiger face Bhairava. Yes, there is a relationship to that, as I try to articulate and try to frame in terms of Mahakala. There are forms of Mahakala in Tibetan Buddhism with him riding a tiger. It's called Vigara Vahana. So the Vigara is or a Bagheera, or if you've read the Jungle, or it's not read. Oh yeah, read the Jungle Book or have seen the Jungle Book. Bagheera, that is a Hindi word for tiger, but the original word is Vigara. So you see a Vigara Vahana. So he who rides a tiger, there's a Mahakala who rides a tiger. It's also associated with the Lurcy. There's a tiger face Lurcy, a P Barab, as we discussed. And he's very important. So this one is actually it is an actual figure. So this is interesting, maybe. And this is where I was maybe trying to go with the discussion of Datuk Gong and Tudi Gong. They are appointed by greater heaven. So this kind of royal ancestor who was a real king, actual flesh and blood at one time, even though all history is somewhat speculative, he was a Datuk and also a Dukun. So he was like a great wisdom master, you could say, a wisdom scientist, like a Witsa, a wizard. And he commanded tigers. Tigers have a deep association. Maybe I should have gone into this before, but tigers have a very deep association with Dukun and with the Malaysian version, the Bomo, because the tiger is said to be a reincarnation of the previous dukuns or bomos that don't become datuks, that don't become saints to be worshipped. Okay, so the soul of a tiger is said to be both of the Dukun, but then the Dukun also takes on the soul of his tiger life. So he's a bit of both. You could say the ruling spirit is the tiger spirit, but he's called a man's name. That's one way to understand it. Okay, so it's also very important because the tiger itself is a Kistrapala. What is a Kistrapala? Well, if you've listened to the Grey Lodge, you probably know what that word means, actually. But if you have never heard the spaces or my show or anything that I've done, then you will, or you're not a Buddhist, maybe, or not, familiar with the Sanskrit. A Kistrapala simply means the field protector. It means the sort of protector spirit, not necessarily the genus loci, but it can. It's the protecting spirit, the kind of governing spirit of a specific area, usually associated with a forest or a mountain. Now, remember, I said that the Datuk Gong or the 2D Gong, the earth god, he's associated with certain kinds of hills, certain roads, certain little um, streets. Obviously, he's associated with the crossroads and the lock streets. And there's like interesting Eshu and Kimbanda parallel there. But I won't digress. I won't go on that tangent today. I won't go on that road, maybe. But the tiger is the protector, and it's not always a masculine force. It's often actually a feminine force. And interestingly, if you look at depictions of Chandaka, so we discussed in the part during the but we'll call it the pre-crash live stream, the which I will splice together, obviously, for the next for the when I release it on the regular feed. But the Chandaka, that goddess, often will ride a tiger, whereas Durga will often ride a lion. So this is a simple iconographic sort of difference that you can use to understand that those are two different characters, two different names, but deeply interrelated. So basically, when Chandaka rides a tiger, she is much more tied to the natural forces, the arising dakinis of the land. And sometimes, one Indian way to understand the tiger mount, this is not the Buddhist way, and this is not even a deeper tantric way, but this is more of a village, black magic, as we call it, Ooga Booga, jungle shamanism way, or jungle tantra way, is that the tiger requires the offering. Remember, we were talking about relational ontology and sort of the Malaysian soul complex, and how you have to recognize the ritual prescription, meaning that the ritual offerings, like what they give to the spirits in Malaysia, like which is traditionally rice cakes and alcohol sometimes, and incense and candle lamps, just like with Buddhism, just like with most esoterica. So they obviously Buddhism, because I practice Dharma, and the whole speculative anthropology series on Southeast Asia is about the undercurrent of magical Buddhism. But I digress. They so the even the offerings themselves have a kind of animus, have a kind of animating force that allows the deity to take form, to take shape, to arise. So the tiger, in a way, requires a sacrifice or offering. However, there's totally vegetarian ways to do this, and I'm not even suggesting that anyone do it. I'm simply saying, from a historical and practical religious, iconographic, art history, a framework, that's how the tiger mount is understood. But in Indonesia, it's actually not quite that. As I'm saying, it's much more closely tied to these masculine figures, these dukuns, these sage kings, sorcerer kings, and the tiger in this case is associated with the deep forest. So a Kistrapala, a field protector, he has to protect the forest from both human and supernatural entities, as well as govern the spirit. He is the Raja, the king of the forest himself. So he rules all the beings that dwell within it. It's very much like a Mahakala. Mahakala again rules all the beings of the carnal ground, and the tiger rules all the beings in his mountain or his specific forest area that he is the king of, which is very much how Malaysian and Indonesian royalty works. They have like little regions, little kingdoms, little principalities. They're called different things, and they are ruled by like a one particular royal family, and where their territory ends, another state usually begins. So, yeah, it's very similar to that in a way. And you can see there's a parallel in the sort of deeper tantric understanding of the reality, and also the physical cartography, and also politics, as well as um, sort of the metaphysical positionality of these sage kings. Whether the descendants of these kinds of figures are magicians or not, and I would say probably, because it's very, very common, right? It's very common in the peninsula and in the archipelago, um, for these for these people to all of the people, everyone basically believes in magic. it's a very high, it's a Jin brain, DJINN. It's a very Jin brain society. I'm obviously not using that as a total pejorative, not just because of my name, but also because I don't see it as being just like village superstition. Of course, it can be, and of course, it can be taken in rather transgressive and antinomian and so a lot of times unproductive and non-generative ways. And I tend to think of myself as moving in the aeonic direction. Of course, Aeon of the Daughter. There are other aeonic ideas that we've discussed many times, but that's the primary one and the primary formulation that I tend to believe in myself. I mean, it's not that I tend to believe in it, I do believe in it, but that's kind of neither here nor there. I always posit it as a speculative framework, but I try and think of my magic in particular, if there is such a thing as moving, as being aeonic. So rather than either Shramonic, meaning ascetic or right hand path, or antinomian or transgressive or left hand path. It's not centrism, it's gray. It's a bit of both, drawing from the best ideas and discarding the rest. So okay, so basically, he is the guardian in this particular instance with this particular royal ancestor. He is the guardian of black turmeric, haldi. It's called Kali haldi. So Kali can also refer to blackness, or but it's not really black, as we've described many times. Black in Sanskrit really refers to blue black, and to black, quote unquote, air quote, black turmeric is actually blue. So that's a really good example for like Sanskrit color theory and Buddhist color magic, and also iconographical understanding of color. So this is the most important medicinal plant in jamu, which is Javanese and Indonesian medicine, although they have different names for it on the different islands. Like the Balinese medicine is a little different. It's more related to Tamil Siddha medicine as well as Ayurvedic. But every island has their influences, and it's all very syncretic. It's not just like pure, like, we was Kang, Indonesian, like Aryanism. It's more complex than that. But Kali Haldi is the most powerful of all the turmerics, and it's a great protector against ghosts. It's very, very fragrant in the sense it smells like camphor. There's another very closely related turmeric ginger plant called galangal. So galangal or galanga is also burned very frequently to dispel evil spirits. When you can't not get the black turmeric, you will burn galangal. So galangal is very, very fragrant, very pungent. It smells like a little bit of ginger, strongly of lemongrass, also of camphor, and it has like that high fragrant note of turmeric. So by itself, it's actually a great exorcism incense. So maybe that's a practical magic note for all of you. Not that most of you will have galangal. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll surprise me in your cupboards, but you want the whole thick slices. You don't want the little, when you go to the when you go to the Botanica, oftentimes if you buy galangal, it's either in these very, very hard, like rock solid little root pieces that are great for medicine bags or mojo bags or whatever. But that's not what you want, and you don't want the little cut and sifted pieces either. They're almost, it's not freeze dried, but they're very small and they're very dense, hard. And so you don't want that either. What if you're going to really burn it? You want the slices that you get at a Filipino or Asian grocery, because those will have the most retained fragrance. Of course, you can break up the roots you get, like the bigger roots that I described from the Botanica that are used for pocket pieces and mojo bags and that. But the Botanica quality herbs is usually kind of low. They don't have a lot of living vitality. This is a very important part, as we discussed, like the living vital system. That is, oh, I didn't really get into that actually. So maybe this is a good transition point to do that. But there is a Malay conceptual idea of the kind of vital soul or the vital spirit of all things. And that is really what is the governing structure. So it's not really the, normative or Sufi understanding of unity with God, but perhaps more aligned with the Sufi idea of going into unity with God, but it's not really quite that either, but it can accommodate that. So The idea is more that everything possesses a vital force, both seen and unseen. But the spirit is not, again, necessarily awake, like the division between Mahakala and Shiva. Mahakala is the god of the waking mind, the night sky, the storming sky, the tempest. He's, angry and laughing and wrathful. And Shiva is the god of the sleeping mind. He is the ascetic. He has gone off to the carnal ground of ultimate reality, abandoned all the hosts, all the ghosts, and all the humans to meditate. That's basically what it is, because he's trying to escape samsara himself. But there's a paradox, because he also can be said, at least at one layer of reality, to create samsara through his own mind. That's interesting, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about, okay, so that was a soul complex. So there is a kind of animistic layer. I don't really like the word animist myself, or the label animistic or animism in general. I think like with Hinduism, I think it's very misunderstood. I think it's misapplied. And I don't actually think it makes a lot of sense to apply it cross culturally. I would rather talk about things in terms of practical ideas, because most people, like, yes, if you listen to this show, especially, like, I know I'm rolling solo tonight, but when I am joined by my extremely brilliant co-hosts, all three of them, when they come, you'll hear a lot of the sort of, we get really deep in K-ball, deep in sort of lately we've been talking a lot about Hellenic ideas and planetary ideas and Yetziratic, like astrological ideas, to sort of work through the hermeneutic of reality. But most people don't have these kinds of not that we're rigid, we're not, but most people don't have extremely rigid conceptions, especially in Southeast Asia, of religion um, or of how the universe works. Of course, there are ruling religious concepts, but whether people ascribe to them or not is a very different story, as we discussed in the Lurcy episode. What is popular esoteric Buddhism is not necessarily of the monastery, but the monastery recognizes in perception um, the practices of the people to be real, as well as like like a kind of active, we'll call it active force in the world. So people's interaction with spirits. So maybe there is a relationship between like the Malay and the Thai stuff. And of course there is. There is a deep layer. And that's why I suggest that you read those two books that I mentioned at the beginning of the other stream, because it will lay the groundwork for all of this thought and how it comes together. So you basically have the introduction of Islam, but it ran concurrently with the introduction of Sufism. So you could say that all the Islam that took root in the archipelago and the peninsula both, was deeply esoteric. And perhaps this suits the Malay character. And obviously, they were tantric and Mahayana Buddhists previously, before, and also they practiced Vedanta and Puranic popular religion, and they had Indian tantras as well, very extensively, as we mentioned. So maybe Sufism was the right kind of, it's the right cosmological framework to sort of get them into, I don't know, closer to God, I guess. One way to think about it. But Sufism, of course, is not it's deeply related to Tantra. It's not necessarily related to Buddhism per se, but there are definite overlaps. There are places where they were deeply syncretic. There were places where Sufism was greatly, greatly influenced by Tantra, whether that is Kali Kola, by Rava Tantras, or by the other kinds of Tantras that there are, Buddhist Tantra. But it's also like, it's, as I said, and just like the Buddhism and Tantra has a relationship to Kabal and Jewish Kabal, Sufism, though, arose a lot later. What we're talking about is like 10th to 13th century stuff. So by this point, this is a very mature point in Tantra. You have all the primary Anuttara yoga texts are already written and widely disseminated among people who practice them. You have the Dharani Sutras, of course, the Dharani mantra texts, the esoteric layer of the Mahayana Buddhists. You have the various we'll call it adamantizing practices of what we're calling Theravadins, but that's not really a thing. But we have to also come back to this idea of Theravada. So if anyone's listening, don't let me forget. Um, Okay, so yeah, Sufism is a late entry point. They've already had Shaivism. They've already been introduced to Shaivism and various streams of the Kali or Durga, at least the Durga tantras, or ideas of Durga within Tantra. Whether that is exactly the same, and she is syncretic with that witch figure named Rangda, so she becomes a Kali-like figure on her own, but she's not quite Kali either. So, as I said, it's an intermediate stage between Durga and Kali, which does actually parallel the Central Asian chronology of how Kali came into being. Because Kali is really a form, it's not a form, she is a part of Chandaka. You could say that. So, yeah, and if you're really interested in this concept, you can go listen to my series, my 11-part series on the Mahavijja. If you want to find that, it's hidden somewhere on the internet. But at least one part of that is on the Threshold Saints feed, Kurkula, Princess of Fire and Flowers. Although that doesn't talk about Kali, that is part of that series. So you can go if you want to dip your toe in. Maybe that's a good starting point. Anyways, okay, so Sufism introduced in the 13th century, but then you have a reintroduction of Buddhism, even before the sort of the Sufi, we'll call it the Sufi expansion. There was a reintroduction of Buddhism, but it was not either Mahayana or Tantric because both of those things already existed. Mahayana largely replaced by more popular Puranic worship of Vishnu in the various avatars. You'll see for the posters, the title cards for the spaces, I used pictures of Ogu Ogu. So these are effigies that are made in Bali, so Balinese Hinduism. Balinese Hinduism again represents, I don't know if I said this, so I shouldn't say again really, but it's again in the sense that it represents a chronological transition point, very accurate, like very well represented in the continuity of popular religion as practiced in Bali, but it represents a sort of a transition point between all of these things: Upanishads, Puranas, Vedas, and Tantras, as well as the addition of various other figures. That figure I named, Rangda, the witch, the evil witch of the forest, as well as Baronket. Baronket is a very important figure, someone I grew up, well, I've never really discussed it that much, I don't think. I don't believe I have, but anyways, it doesn't matter. Baronket is the lion-headed god who is the protector of the forest. He's sometimes called a sky lion or a spirit lion, but he's not really a lion. He's really more of a chimera, but yeah, he's kind of a chimera, but he's kind of a lion too. So there were lions on Java at one time, but I'm not sure it necessarily refers to a lion, but it could. It definitely could. It could also refer to a tiger. Sometimes that is how he's understood as well, of course. Tigers being the ultimate Kistrapala, the field protector, the sort of forest protector, the local god of the forest. Also the Dukun, right? The Dukun spirit. What is a better Dukun spirit than a local god of the forest? So, of course, the local god of the forest then gets a human rebirth and he becomes a wizard. That totally makes sense to me. Okay, so Baronket is this kind of figure who is in opposition to Rangda. And so, why am I bringing this up? Because a lot of the stories are drawing from the Ramayana, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the various Puranas, from the various Upanishads, but they're also drawing from um, local ideas of those same things. So, why am I saying that? Because there's one way to understand Baronket, this lion-headed god of the forest, to be a kind of Vishnu figure. So very much like Naram Simha. Naram Simha, most people don't know this, or most Westerners don't know this, but Naram Simha, the lion-headed deity that is also known as Vishnu, is actually also a Buddhist deity, and they are not one isn't necessarily older than the other. It's kind of interesting, but he's not a common tantric figure anymore. He's not really commonly practiced in Tibetan Buddhism, but he is still practiced in Southeast Asia, probably because the iconography exists. But his name is now I'm forgetting, but one way to call him is Naram Simha Avadalokitsvara. So the lion-headed um, Lord of Great Compassion. So he's considered to be a form of Avalokitesvara or Amitabha, who is the Buddha of infinite light, or aka the red Buddha, the Buddha of the Western direction, Buddha of fire, and Buddha of infinite compassion as well. That's another way to understand his name, Bodhicitta. And so Baronket can be understood as this kind of Naram Simha Vishnu figure, and then Rangda, as I said, can be understood as a Chandaka or Kali-like figure, and so they have a perennial battle, and it's sort of that how it's often described, especially to tourists, is that it is the war between the light and the darkness. But if you actually understand the Vedas, you'll understand that all of these kind of battles are perennial cyclical battles, and in fact, Rangda slash Durga slash Chandaka slash Kali she's actually not an anti-cosmic figure necessarily. She can act as one, but as I said, she's the mother of imminent reality, the mother of the here and now. So why would she want to destroy the world? Maybe she's just trying to destroy our preconception. Maybe she's playing a cosmological role. This is something that is interesting, I think, from my Buddhist perspective, when I often hear people talk about ideas of eternalism. Well, one idea of eternalism is that the cosmic cycle runs itself in infinite loop. So that's much more of like a Indian idea, right? And of course, it's a Buddhist idea, like the cycle of samsara. But the cycle of samsara is much more similar to a spiral rather than it is to simply just like a static. It's not just a wheel. It's a wheel in motion, right? There are different places in time and space, and no single position is the exactly the same perennial point. That's why I don't ever describe myself as a perennialist, even though sometimes I do cheekily use that language. So, okay, so we're gonna move on. I know this was kind of a disjointed one, but I think it fits the theme of the archipelago. So this is for Dawnlander in particular, but it's not really. It's also a big part of the space, or big part of the topic, excuse me. So you see, this is President Sukarno. He's holding what is called a keris or keris. And a keris is a magical blade. Yes, it's magic. And it's made of various materials. So in the Witsa episode, we talked a lot about Buddhist metallurgy and how it's super, super important in this deeper esoteric Theravadan layer. Again, there was a reintroduction of Theravada Buddhism into the peninsula as well as the archipelago. And this, to a degree, does continue in a way. This kind of like shamanic, it goes a lot it's very complementary to a lot of Sufi ideas of the world. So you can maybe have what you can have a crypto Buddhist sort of ideas underneath this sort of esoteric Islamic framework. But anyways, this is President Sukarno. So he was president of Indonesia during the 50s and the 60s, and he was also a Dukun, an actual shaman. And the keris that he was holding is made of meteorite iron. This is the most magical kind. And in fact, his keris is said to have come from the 13th century. So a very ancient and old um, ritual blade that is forged, was forged by a wizard king, exactly like what we were talking about in the space pre crash. So it's often curved. That's how people generally think of them. I'll add a different one. So you can see these ones have the serpent curve, the Naga curve, but not all of them do, right? Some of them are straight blade. It's just regional differences and differences in the, like, who is making the sword maker, and like what wizard and what methodology and what metals they use. So but these can be used for combat, especially the straight edge version. They can be used for combat, but in general, no. They tend to be very brittle, and it's more of a ritual implement. But it's not really like a ritual implement. Like, I know all the edge lords, if we have any still watch this show, they'll look at it and be like, oh my god, yes, I must have that athame for my personal wizarding. But they're not really for ritual sacrifice. They're actually much more like a wand. We've talked about this many times before in previous Grey Lodge spaces, the sort of positionality or what the equivalent ritual implement is for a kila. This is much more like a kila. Of course, I'm sure some people do use them for sacrifice or red offerings. I'm a Buddhist, so I don't do such things and I don't condone such things. But I'm just simply saying that perhaps there are people who do. But the more fundamental idea is that they will use red offerings, usually of people. I know, extremely transgressive tonight. They will use red offerings, meaning blood, of people, usually to forge the blades for the evil. There can be a good. Okay, so let's break this down. A Karis can be either good or evil. Now, you'll ask, oh, it's such a Manichaean division. Don't you always talk about, Jin, like how we need to defeat the Manichaeanism, the dualism as the greatest mind poison? We have to defeat that in our own minds. Of course you do. But in this kind of way of thinking, you can have an evil blade, but you don't have to necessarily use it for evil things. But many of the stories talk about these wizard kings, these tantric shaman kings, these Dukun kings. They'll have the blade forged by some mysterious tantrika in the forest, by an orang, by indigenous kind of shaman or indigenous Dukun, or just by an ascetic. Again, going back to that Sufi and Theravadan sort of ideas of what makes a wizard. And so they will forge the blade and give it to the king, but first when they will do it, they'll do it on like a black moon, a new moon, and they will forge it in like I'll just give it a magical sort of like remix spin. We'll say like 13, the blood of 13 princes or something like that. But also that you can also think of this as like less ritually specific. It's a lot more to do with conceptual ideas, of course, as well as like being on the battlefield. So a prince, even in my example, I gave it specifically because a prince doesn't necessarily mean even a prince as people would understand. It could mean various youths on the battlefield, like soldiers fighting each other. So if you sort of wipe the blade in their blood, that would give it to them. That would give the blade, imbue the blade with a kind of ritual potentiality. Now, one thing that we often talk about, as I always post usually on the title cards for the spaces, turn thunder into diamond, right? Well, another way to ritually activate the blade is to have it be struck by lightning. And it will be struck by lightning at specific times and very specific places, the Mahasmashana. And one thing I should mention about the battlefield, since we're talking about sort of the battlefield as this kind of ritual space, the battlefield is also the Mahasmashana. The battlefield is also a kind of carnal ground. And who rules the battlefield in a tantric conceptualization? Durga, Chandika, and sometimes Kali. She can also be a battlefield goddess. So you could say that that's her sort of Netzach Gevurah connection. That's when she's both. She's both the goddess of Mars, war, as well as the resplendence of Venus, the diamond, the fortress. So that's basically a Karis in a nutshell. And okay, so we're going to go back to our President Sukarno. So President Sukarno was a third positionist. He believed in this formulation of Indonesian civilization called Pancasila, which means the five roots. So it's like race, religion, various things. And he said that there are five each. So he sort of built out this mandala, you could call it, of five categories. And each category has five different permutations that are allowable under the unified identity. So it's a very Sufi idea, maybe in a way, or Kebatinan at least, or Kejawin, which is Java. It's like a less formalized form of Kebatinan, which is more Javanese. But anyways, so he formulates this kind of like 5-spot mandala, 5-spot pattern as being sort of like the root, the sort of tree for all what Indonesia could be as a civilization. So you see here, he's giving whatever Fidel Castro. I couldn't even think of his name. I'm so sorry. Fidel Castro. He's giving him a keris. So ritually made blade. I don't know if it's an ancient one or if it's a recently made one. Now he is a Dukun himself, Sukarno, right? But he also employed various Dukuns for it to help with state functions. So this is very common. This is so common, as we discussed innately, like not innately, inherent with the Witsa series. The relationship between the Witsa, the wizard saints, and the actual state is inseparable. This is also true for Indonesia. As I said, it was originally ruled by tantric wizard kings. So, if the lineage is tantric wizard kings, not every king, of course, or not every ruler is a wizard in him. Not every king is a wizard himself. So if he's not a wizard himself, he has to go get the magic from the people that have it. So this is also part of it. Supernaturalism, curses, magic, shamanism, psychism, um, all the tools of the hyperspace kingdom, they availed themselves of it, tantra, etc. So you see, he's giving him it. He's giving him a keris because the keris also signifies that kind of wizard kinghood. It's kind of a way to demarcate a kind of royalty. Remember, we were talking about datuks, sort of like as barons or as knights, as a sort of title. And in Malaysia, a datuk is a baron or a knight. Like people can have that title. Sometimes people will have the title datuk. And it's usually, well, it's contentious, but it usually refers to a really, really well off businessman who may or may not run a shady business, but has lots of money. So he can afford to purchase titles just like they do in England. It's not just for the jungle people. But yeah, sometimes they do that as well. But it's a kind of symbol of the Dukun or the knighthood. There's also a very interesting series of images where President Sukarno gives John F. Kennedy, yes, JFK, the last Druid president. He gives him also a keris. So I always found that really interesting. And he also, there's several images where he shows JFK his keris, and he explicitly wears it when they're out driving, which is not uncommon to show that you have a keris, because again, it's a sign of knighthood or a kind of elevated status in the cosmology. But it's interesting because at times he wouldn't wear it so explicitly. He would do it like maybe he would always keep it on his person, but you wouldn't always see it. So I just thought, wow, that is kind of interesting. And he gave him one, and who knows what kind it was. Was it forged in blood of virgins? I don't know. Maybe. It's just an interesting speculative idea, of course. Okay, so we're gonna move on. So this is here. We're gonna look at a picture of Durga. I know everybody's gonna be like, "Oh, it's Kali, Jin. You're lying to us." Well, no, I'll explain it in a logical art historian fashion. Okay, so you see that she is an intermediate form because she's red. Kali is her name, even as we talked about with turmeric. Kali's name refers to the blue black nature of space time, really. It's really time, but it will say it's space time. So she's red. So she's much more like a Chandika in the tantric form or a Bhairavi. Anyways, we won't get into who Bhairavi is. That's maybe a totally different episode. But you see, she's riding a tiger. Kali is very, very, very uncommonly depicted as riding a Vahana. When she does ride a Vahana, it is either a corpse, and then she takes on a different name, Chamunda, or she rides a jackal, which is where she is a Dakini. So that's a different kind of Kali, actually, a different kind of destruction of time. But anyway, so this is much more closely related to Durga or Chandika, but specifically Chandika, the shining one. Although interestingly, she maintains the sorry, mic issue. She maintains the iconographic depiction of the lolling tongue, where it's like sticking out. This is from the Kalika Purana. So this is a very important text about the goddess Kali that probably came about in like the sixth or seventh century. So it's after the Devi Mahatmya Purana, where Kali is also described as part of a form of Chandika or Durga, but not necessarily her own distinct figure of worship. So, but by this point, by the time of the Kalika Purana, she is her own distinct cult figure. The destruction of time, so you can see the division of we. anyways, this is old Grey Lodge lore, but basically, all the goddesses can be thought of as representing the divisions, the Aristotelian divisions of how the universe is or works. So, Kali is obviously the destruction of time, Mahakali is the destruction of cosmic time, and Chandika is the way out, perhaps. But she's also the mother of immanence. So you can see here, she appears very much like the tiger, and that is it's very intentional, very purposeful. She, as the tiger, also represents this kind of ferocious and carnal nature, we could say, but also the protector, the field protector of the actual ground that we walk on, which is also a Mahasmashana. I know people will be like, well, I don't live on a Mahasmashana, Jin. Well, in a way you do, because all samsara takes place on the grounds that we dwell. So at times, the places that we live have been graveyards, carnal grounds, things have passed away, people have passed away, trees have died, plants have died, and the cycle continues. So this is her arising from that kind of space of time, the destruction of time, meaning the movement forward in time. Meow. That's for Cassandra. So if anyone listens back and wonders why I said that, that's why I said it. So basically that's what it is. So she is the sort of primordial mother, but she's unenlightened. It's a very important distinction. She's unenlightened in the Buddhist way, and maybe even in the tantric way. She's unenlightened. So she's very, very ferocious. She only plays her cosmic role as the destroyer of demons, but in and of herself, maybe she's also a demon. Maybe you could call her. I know we've got a lot of Warhammer 40K fans, not only in the lodge, but among perhaps the co-hosts as well. Perhaps I don't know anything about that, but you could call her Slaanesh. But she's not necessarily evil, but she's Mamos or chaos personified. So she's a very ferocious being. But this is the figure that they predominantly use in modern sort of Balinese, what we'll call tantra, but it's not necessarily tantra as in coming from text. For something to be tantra, it actually has to be related to directly to one of the tantric texts. That's something that I've discussed with Solar many times. Is this what tantra really is? Well, it has to come directly from bina, textual understanding, and then also experiential practice, hokmah. It has to be those two things brought together in synthesis. A sort of historical wisdom science with the kind of ecstatic practices of the upasaka or the tantrika on the marga, on the path. So just give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. There. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so so I didn't really finish Sukarno. But anyways, about the Chandika. So she is a very carnal ground deity. She's not worshipped in the main temple. She's always worshipped in ruins. There's a lot of ruins. Remember, we talked about the two primary tantric syncretic dynasties right at the beginning, one from Jawa, one from Sumatra, but also Bali has its own sort of historical complex. But okay, so basically, yeah, so basically, Indonesia had a kind of amnesia. This is very interesting to me and has always been, is they totally forgot about these sort of originating tantric, syncretic Hindu Buddhist complexes. The kind of 17th century colonialism from the Dutch and the British and various other factions. Basically, but at that point, well, okay, so there's two different sort of schools of thinking. One is that the tantric complex had totally disappeared from cultural memory. So that's one way, right? One way of thinking about it. But but then there's another that colonialism itself partly erased the memory. But then you also have to admit that the Dutch and British and French and American anthropologists also rediscovered a lot of these temples. So, but of course, village people never stopped using the temples. People in rural areas or even outside of outside of the major cities, they never stopped using these places. So Rangda or Durga or Kali, but they never call her Kali. Just keep that in mind. She is worshipped amongst the ruins, and you often see her statue in the Hindu Buddhist ruins. And so but you also find her as like an object of worship, not necessarily. Sometimes she is depicted as a murti, like as a more normative kind of like Hindu statue, with the given like offerings, like food in terms of the normative kind of like Javanese, Balinese Hinduism, like rice cakes and incense and flowers and sometimes alcohol and lamps, and petitions as well. But sometimes she is also just conceptualized, which is a more tantric way to understand it. But if you go to the Royal Museum, uh, I can't even think tonight. I'm so sorry. If you go to the Royal Museum in Indonesia, they will have the National Museum. They have images of Bhairava and Mahakala. So you can see that they did clear like huge ones, big stone monolithic figures, like enormous. So you can see that they clearly did worship Murti style, but it's in Tantra, a deity really arises in your own mind. So even if you don't have a Murti or an image, as long as you have a textual understanding of what the deity should look like, you can go to the carnal ground or the graveyard and pray. So, anyways, we're gonna move on from that, but I think it's all interesting ideas because that is kind of what modern Indonesia. Maybe this is a good way to sort of return with a V to this more contemporary historical, Dukunery, we'll call it. Is that it's perennial in a way because obviously they're Islamic or Muslim or Sufi, at least influenced by, so we can call it perennialism in a way. So he's sort of revivifying, rectifying, and resurrecting these kind of tantric ideas of Indonesia, of the islands, of the archipelago. It's interesting to note that he loved women. He loved his sky wives. And so he did have quite a few lovers. And, he generally, which is probably common for wizards in a way, because there's a lot, they have a lot of accumulated energy. And the sky wives obviously can be vehicles for the goddesses or the dakinis in and of themselves. Like human women can be dakinis, but they can also be vehicles for the skywives. That doesn't necessarily mean channeling or mediumship or any of the things that people normally associate with what I'm saying. In fact, it doesn't really mean that. It's actually talking about the subtle sort of signs and symbols that the dakinis can give you that you are able to sort of cross into different margas and hermeneutics through reality, crossing the hyperspace kingdom. So, um, yeah, I think for having oh, okay, well, we didn't really talk about the tiger uncle worship. Should we talk about that before we end? Yeah, I guess we can. We didn't even talk about Ogu Ogu. I didn't finish my thing on that either. So there's an Ogo Ogo image. So I did talk about it a little bit where I said it was like these tantric creations. They would make them out of wood and paper mache in the old days or bamboo. And then the effigies are also burned. That's a big part of it. So they would recreate these historical epics, Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, et cetera, and but also include the local stories of Chandaka and Baranket, and they will burn it at the end of the night. So it's like a parade with all of these various demons. It's usually depicted as like these demons, but sometimes you'll see Rama or Vishnu or a Dukun or some hero or some Indonesian royalty of some dynasty. They'll be fighting the demons. Or Hanuman, you see Hanuman is very common. They'll be fighting the demons. So it's kind of like this story of the perennial cosmic battle. And then the effigies all get burned at the end, so they return obviously to the actual Mahasmashana, the realm of the imaginal. The ideas, the Hokmah, the empty wisdom in space, they become returned very literally in the ash. So they enter into Pralaya, the destruction of the worlds, through the story and in the actual material manifestation that the deities take. If the deities are real or not real. And I'm not saying that they're not real. I'm just saying that this is a very Indonesian way to sort of understand the samsaric cycle. So when we talk about things like subtle dharma, this is a kind of subtle dharma where they're understanding them to both live and die. So, yeah, to end, we will, I think, If I can get it to work, we'll see. Maybe not. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're gonna have to remove one. Sorry, guys. Again, solo dolo, which means that all technical issues are also my issues. Okay, we're gonna do that one. And we're also gonna remove. Apologies again. I know I could keep riffing. There we go. Okay. So this is an image from a tiger temple in Kuala Lumpur. You'll say, okay, well, this is just tigers. Well, the tiger at the very top of the hierarchy or the pantheon, he is called the uncle tiger. Tiger, yeah, yeah. So grandfather tiger is one way you could say. So he is like the king of all the tiger gods. So as we said with the talking about Datuk Gong and the earth gods, that there are multiples, they're multiplicity, they exist in multiplicity. The tiger gods are the same, right? Because they're only genus loci of specific mountains and specific forest areas, territorials, territorial gods. So the king of the tiger gods is beyond good and evil. That's what he's called, beyond good and evil, because he does not subscribe to human morality. So in I was going to say dominism, but that's not really what I'm talking about. Daoism, excuse me. In Daoism, well, at least folk Taoism or popular Taoism, which I would posit is Taoism. That's just it's a ridiculous sort of differentiation made in Western scholarship. But anyways, the popular Taoism, the Tiger King is propitiated as a vengeful deity, meaning that he will enact karmic or cosmic justice on your enemies if propitiated in the correct way. Now, for the edgelords out there, he's not sacrificed anything. He is given salt pork, bacon. This is his preferred sort of entreatment. And you even see him in Hong Kong. He's often propitiated during villain hitting. Villain hitting is a very old kind of Cantonese village magic where you take your left shoe and you will beat someone's image or a doll with their personal effects or a doll that resembles them with their birth date inside. So you can beat that with your left shoe, and you often do it reciting Tiger King prayers or invocations. Not always. Sometimes the deity is different depending on, but he's kind of he's a very gray deity, and I think that's also why I like him. He kind of exists in this liminal space of both civilization and the wilderness, and he's also like kind of gray morality. He does not take a side in the human sort of interactions. He goes with what he thinks is the cosmic justice or karmic justice. And another way you can think of it is he sort of balances the polarities, right? Because even if you could say he eats someone speculatively, and returns them to the ghost world's return, that can also be said to be part of their karma or samsaric, like sort of journey or marga. So, yeah, don't piss off the Tiger King. That's probably a good rule of thumb. But you can see, like the Tiger Kings beneath him, they're not even all propitiated with salt pork. So the salt pork idea becomes much more common in Taoism, and the sort of more transgressive. It's not really transgressive, but he's a very hot spirit. So a hot spirit is a spirit that's very hard to handle. So he's usually propitiated outside. But in this case, he's propitiated inside. And as you can see, his offerings are largely vegetarian, although they might include rice wine, which I think they do in the little blue cups. In Taoism, as with all tantric and Buddhist, at least if you understand Tantra or like esotericism of East Asia, all ritual offerings of alcohol are actually transmuted into spirits. Like in Tantra, we would say alcohol becomes Quran, which is the Sanskrit word, which means spirits. So you would offer, and you use mantras, use visualization, you maybe shake the bottle in specific ways, different kinds of things. maybe you make the wine in different ways, like on specific ritually prescribed nights on the Nietzsche cycle, the 14 or 15 day, sometimes it's 16 days between the moon change, the new moon and the full moon. So sometimes they will use those kind of tantric ritual prescriptions to transform the alcohol into Quran. But in normative Taoism, they will say some prayers, some mantras over it, and that is thought to transmute the nature of it. So it becomes like not just for the low spirits. So that helps his moderate his temperature. So if he's a very hot spirit, then you give him a little of the, you don't give him directly the alcohol. You have to give him like the salt pork. You don't give him a blood offering. You give him salt pork because why? Salt in Tantra is also referred to as, that's part of the what being a viras is. So if you listen to this show or Threshold Saints, you will hear me talk about like the Virasic Tantrika. This is called the salted hero or the seasoned hero. Both are very viable ways to understand. The salt pork is a kind of temperance of his hot nature. So if you give him a rooster, which is another common offering for more black flag or exorcism rites or black magic, Taoist black magic, um, that will enact him to be very hot. But that also means that he can be very hot in your own life, meaning that it can easily rebound or, turn your life into chaos. So that's why he's given the salt. And that's why he's also given the ritually transmuted alcohol. Again, it's relational ontology. What spirit are you trying to invoke? Well, I'm trying to invoke the Tiger King Jin. Well, if you're trying to invoke which kind of which form of the Tiger King, which energy of the Tiger King, which octave? Of course, if you're a normal person or even a wizard, do you want to invoke the hottest, most ferocious spirit who's going to demand all of these things and maybe even your life if you don't acquiesce? No. You want to bring everything into temperance, into balance, into the cosmic. um you don't necessarily want to unify with God. That's not my idea for sure as like a tantric Buddhist, but you definitely want to, especially in Taoism, we'll use a Taoist framework. You want to align. So this is something that you'll hear Eros say often: alignment with the planetary spheres. Obviously I agree with like 99% of what Eros says most of the time in terms of like her planetary astrology and like her kind of alchemical way she thinks about it. It's very similar to Yetziradic astrology, as everyone from the lodge knows that I heavily rely on to describe reality. But I have to say that it's not about unity. It is actually about alignment with the cosmic sort of cycle. So are you moving in the samsaric direction? So that's more a Taoism idea. Taoism also posits chaos. Yes, the primordial grandmother, very Chandaka in a way, posits the primordial grandmother as the ultimate representation of the chaos. The Barbello of the swamp becomes the ruler of reality. So in a way, she is both the archon and also the one who gives us magic. Just like, and this is a very common sort of dharmic way to understand. The goddess gives us magic in her most ferocious, low consciousness state, in her state as the husk of the carnal ground, this grandmother who has given birth to all reality on the blood ocean. So all the ferocious, demonic, carnal ground beings within it. And she's spent. She cannot give birth anymore. She's a crookback. So that is when she gives people mantras, is when she's in that low consciousness. Because magic is really essentially, that's what the lesson is that magic is essentially non-dual. How do we use it? How do we employ it? That's what's upaya, skillful. So there's something to think about for Tiger King, I think. Okay, last one. So you'll see here, we're going to end on a saint note, which I think is very appropriate for the space and for the show in general. This is a true Datuk Gong shrine from Malaysia. So you'll see there are Chinese elements. There's a Chinese, you see in the back, all the Hansa is written, the Chinese characters are written on the red placard. This is actually a god name. It's the name of the gods, or the city of not city god, the earth deity or ancestors, because it can be both, will be on the plaque. So it's the invocation of specific spirits by name. It's a very Chinese idea. And oftentimes in a lot of Taoist temples, they will not have any effigy of the deity. They will just worship the name plaque that is ritually made, but it's not necessarily looks like a sigil or anything. All of that is hidden, or it's like more conceptual. But the name done in the calligraphy, that is considered the primary vehicle for the deity to arise. But you'll see that there are also pictures of actual dukuns, actual shamans, in the shrine itself. And you can see he also wields a keris. So I didn't actually bring up a picture. Oh, I think I brought up a picture. Yeah, I did. I did. I did. Good job, Jen. So I brought up a picture of Tudi Gong, the Chinese earth god, and he holds a gnarled elmwood staff called a Ru Yi. So that's different. That's a scepter that shows his rulership. But in a way, it's interrelated to the keris because, as we talked about, the keris is a symbol of being a Datuk. The keris is a symbol of the wizard king or the wizard, the wizard saint. If you're not a king, maybe you're not a king, but you're just a wizard saint. So it's a symbol of your wizard sainthood. And so a Ruyi, or the gnarled staff, is also a symbol of the rulership of a deity or a Taoist immortal. So this is a more Malaysian version. But of course, this worship doesn't really exist without the Chinese community. So, or the Pernakan or the Nonya, which are all mixed race. So you have like people bringing in both ideas for the last 400 years and very much embodying the kind of syncretism and Hapaboreanism of the region. So you can see that he's accompanied by all the different Datuks, and but he is the king. He's wearing the yellow, which is from Chinese, really, signifying his like imperial rulership of all the Datuks of the area. And he might not even be the king of all the Datuks. He might just be, the grandfather of the city, or a specific small mountain or a hill or whatever, or this shrine even, or the local area. So that's why I wanted to open with the idea of unity versus complexity, because I think it's not just one or the other. It's not just Islamic. It's not just Hindu. It's not even just esoteric Buddhism. But I would say esoteric Buddhism again is the underlying foundational layer to it all. So I know this one was a little disjointed, but we will do it part two, as we will do a part two to the Witsa, not Witsa. We'll do a part two for Lurcy, and we'll do a part two for this. And I will announce tonight that we are going to do a Chinese episode, or like an episode on Daoshi, which are the Taoist wizards. And we are also going to do an episode on Onmyodo and Mikyo, Japanese sort of shaman wizards of the mountain, and also shrine maidens. So we'll do. I have plans to do more, to continue the speculative anthropologies, especially of Asia. But as I mentioned very briefly, that we're going to do a long form series on the Americas. So book club very much continues. Speculative anthropologies very much continues. Epiphanion part 3, that will happen sometime in the future. I don't know quite when. I will have to see everyone's schedule and see where we're at as a space. But yeah, I'll make sure it happens, even if it's just 2 or 3 of us. I'm getting no. Okay, you don't want no more Epiphanion? Is that what you're saying, Cassandra? I was going to, but then Don Lander said he wanted to do part 3. So I was like, it might be a really great opportunity for him to do live streaming. Okay, I don't think it crashed. Thank God. No, as soon as we invoked the Datuks, it stopped crashing. So, maybe I'll start doing that as I used to do when we used to host these on X, Twitter, as I used to do like a kind of evocational sort of intro to the spaces, or to the to the lives. Maybe we'll return to that, but yeah, as soon as we brought Datuk up, it all kind of coalesced and calmed down. Maybe he calmed down the chaos, so which is what he does. I hope all the wizard saints that we've discussed, Lurcy, Witsa, Datuk, I hope they all and the Dukuns, of course. I hope they all bless the series and the space because it's really for them and about them. So, thank you guys so much. Apologies again for the technical issues. I know this was a relatively short space, but as I am, I'm riding the dragon solo, which is a totally, it's very strange to do a live solo. And I have to say, I do miss my co hosts. But of course, Cassandra and Vanessa came to show me some LOVE in the chat, and I very much appreciate it. And but I'll shout out my co-hosts. So Solar Exile, um, good job on the hit tweet. Check out his Substack. Um, follow him. He's spooky, but he's a good guy. And then, of course, Joshua the Branch. He is not spooky, but he is a funny dad joker. And he has his own podcast shit that he's doing. And of course, he's always on very frequent contributor to Threshold Saints, as is Solar, of course. I think they've actually been on the same amount of episodes, but I can't remember. I'd have to go through and count. Maybe Solar has him beat out by one or two now, but we're closely. Joshua is closely catching up. So, I don't favor either of them as my co-host more than the other. I appreciate them both for their, distinct and individual views that they bring to it. But I really, there wouldn't be a show without either of those two. So, though, even though I'm a little well, Solar told me he wasn't coming, so that's fine. But I am a little annoyed that I did it solo, but you know what? It's okay. It's really okay because this was my series in the sense that I kind of sprung it on people. I didn't discuss it with anyone. I was like, oh, the lightning struck me. So this was my idea. And I didn't want to, I didn't want to impose on anyone. So that's anyone who knows me knows that's my nightmare is like the imposition of like thing. So thank you so much, Vanessa. And then of course, Eros up. Eros is our most recent co-host, but I feel like I've known her for 10 million years. Um, she has her own channel. Follow her, Eros to Ethos on X, Twitter. All the links are on our homepage on YouTube. If you want to follow the show, you can follow it on X and IG on at Threshold Saints. Or you can follow me at Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn. And then next week, Battlestar fucking Galactica. It will be really amazing. We're calling the series Lords of Kobol, but each individual episode will be titled its own title, but it's under the broad umbrella of Lords of Kobol. So everybody will check that out. I'll make sure it's scheduled Saturday, and all of the, everybody is credited and has all their. Everybody knows. I'll make sure to promo it heavily for the next couple weeks. Yes, speculative anthropologies will continue every other week. I don't know what I'm going to do yet. Maybe we'll do Battlestar for 3 weeks in a row. Who knows? Who knows? It's always kind of I'm it's an easing, and sometimes you make editorial decisions that aren't necessarily the best or even the most transparent, but everything has a reason to rhyme, you could say. In terms of Threshold Saints, I hope to get Solars and CJ's. CJ, who's also been a frequent contributor to the show, I know he often listens to the spaces. I don't know how often, but I think in this case with this kind of Southeast Asian magic, he'll definitely be listening. So CJ, if you're listening, your episode with Solar will be out the next episode, and then we're going to get a very extra special episode with a female writer. I think this is my first episode with a female writer, woman writer. Anyways, it's going to be really cool. So I've got two in the archive. So both of those have to come out, but I have one that I think will be perfect for the next one after Solars, and then we'll see. I've got a bunch more, and yeah, if you want to hear, I've got like Jacob Everett, I've got Max Thrax, I've got another episode with Solar and Brian Gaffey, who is the host of the Liminal Currents podcast, which is a more left-hand path, like occult podcast that I highly recommend. I enjoy it myself. I think Brian's a very nice person, and I I I would consider Brian to be. I don't know if we're friends, but I like Brian. I think he's cool. So I would fuck with Brian anytime. So that will happen. I've got Cassandra, of course, Eros. Cassandra is mostly about astrology, Cabal, because one of the reasons that Cassandra and I are good friends is because we have our love of Cabal. And so that's coming up. That'll be really cool because it was it's rare for me to have also women in general on the show. So I definitely filled out the roster with Cassandra, Eros. We talked about the Red Book extensively, 2.5 hours, and it should be really great. So thank you guys again. And well, we'll go for 4 more minutes. I know I keep saying like we're gonna peace out, but I need to have my magic number. So we'll go for 4 more minutes. So what else? Okay, so that's Threshold Saints. What about and Grey Lodge? So we did all of that. So I don't know. Okay, so let's go out on a old head Grey Lodge note. What should everybody be doing about like in terms like we discussed speculative anthropology, speculative wisdom science. So what should everybody take away from this? Well, I'm not telling anyone to practice this kind of ritual or spiritual or religious framework. I don't think it's viable necessarily because this is like a complex that's been built up over 2,000 years with multiple layers of influences and religions and racial identities and postmodern. I know that's such a dirty word, but I like postmodernism, so that's fine. And dirty words sometimes. Actually haven't sworn on any of these, I don't think, but maybe. But anyways, the yeah, you don't need to practice, you don't need to become a Dukun yourself because a Dukun is all of these things, right? Like that's what I discussed at the very beginning. A Dukun is a psychic, it's a scion, it's a shaman, it's a sorcerer, it's a tantrika, it's a Sufi saint, it's a wizard. It's all of these things are that's a Dukun. It's of the forest and it's of the city. It's of the streets and it's of the sheets. So, you don't have to always be limited by the frameworks. I think that's what the whole point of doing the speculative anthropologies of Southeast Asia series was to show people like I'm not really an anomaly. Like, yes, I'm Hyperborean. I'm an anomaly in the sense that like I'm a special evil star god reborn onto the world to save it, sort of. But I'm also not really I'm not really unique in the sense that like all of this is very syncretic. It's the primordial grounds, if you want to call it that, from where I arise. And it also makes sense that a lot of other people who have like syncretic ideas of the world also arise. And sort of one thing I didn't discuss, which I kind of wish I did, but as I said, this will have a part two. This exact episodes, Dukun will have a part two, as will the Lursi episode. But the revival of Buddhism in Indonesia was by a very important theosophical monk. He was a monk. He's a Buddhist monk. He's Indonesian. His name is Ajahn um, Janara Kita. Sorry, Ashin Janara Kita. I couldn't think of it. So he was a saint, not a saint. Well, maybe, but he was a very famous dharmic master, and he sort of repositioned Indonesian Buddhism to not just be Theravadan or Mahayana or Tantric. He actually said that there's a way to sort of unify all of the three yanas, and he himself had a PhD from the Theosophical University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, where if you watch the Occult Rejects, you will know that I believe that's where Dr. Justin Sledge went to university. So some interesting correlations maybe in the nature of reality. So with that being said, everybody meditate, everybody cultivate, if not righteousness and goodness in and of yourself, at least cultivate peace, tranquility, and also the primordial ground where all magic, all deities, all perception will arise. Everybody do that. That starts in meditation. That doesn't mean you have to stay in meditation the whole time, but meditation is it's where that's the place that you'll learn what magic really is and what reality really is. So that being said, thank you guys so much. Peace.